this case is different. Okay, yes, it is a family annihilator. Josh Powell was a family annihilator. Yes, there was a missing wife. Yes, there was a horrible, tragic ending to it all. But it's not the usual profile. This is not the narcissist who was living some secret double life. This is not the guy who had built up a facade for an overdeveloped and grandiose ego and panicked when it all came crashing down.
I didn't do anything. I mean, I don't know where she's at. I don't even know where to start looking.
The problem with Josh Powell is not that his ego was overdeveloped. In fact, it's that it was underdeveloped. Okay, Josh Powell is like an undifferentiated psychic mass. He is someone who doesn't stand up straight in the world. He seeps. Okay, he absorbs, he consumes. The more you look at him, not just what he did, but how he behaved in the years leading up to it, the more it starts to feel like he never really formed a self at all. Okay, he was not allowed to separate or individuate, and for that reason, he couldn't tolerate anyone else separating from him. So I want to get into why that was and how that works. We're going to talk about Margaret Mailer's theories on individuation of the self, and we're going to talk about blob mindset, tumorous growth, okay? But first I should say, I'm Andrew Vandervaart, a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, and any opinions expressed in this video are purely my own personal ones, not the views of any institution, and not a professional evaluation, rather speculation for the purposes of education, all right? Hopefully that's enough Asians for now. Also, viewer discretion is advised.
Josh? Hey, I'm Chris Jones from Tennessee. How are you?
Okay.
Yeah. How you doing? I know this has been difficult for you. What's going through your mind today?
Well, I've been trying to figure out what I can do so I don't sit idle.
In December of 2009, when Susan Cox was missing, this reporter from a local news channel manages to ambush Josh Powell and ask him a few questions. Right? This is very early in the case. I apologize for the video quality. This was the best I could find. But let's just, before we get into all the details, let's just take a look at Josh Powell.
I'm dealing with this repeatedly.
Sure.
I was just going to go in and get my kids because, you know, they're
how are they doing?
So what we have is Josh Powell out the gate basically whining that the media wants to talk to him. He says, I'm dealing with this repeatedly.
Trying to figure out what I can do so I don't sit idle. I'm dealing with this repeatedly.
Sure.
So Josh Powell acting like he's so put upon because the media has been trying to talk to him. Now, you would think if your wife were missing and you desperately wanted to find her, the more attention was on the case, the better, right? But I don't think Josh Powell is really thinking about how he's coming off. And that's because I don't think he really has a mind's eye, all right?
I was just going to go in and get my kids because, you know, they're
how are they doing?
They've been doing good.
So the reporter's clever. Josh Powell is trying to get out of this interview immediately. He's saying, I got to go check on my kids, right? My kids must be the most important thing to me. And the reporter says, how are they doing? You know, keeping him engaged by asking about the kids. Because he just wants Josh Powell to talk.
They've been doing good, as far as I can tell.
And his actual answer is doubly strange. They've been doing good as far as I can tell. One, their mother's been missing for days. How could they possibly be doing good? And two, why would this be something where it's hard to tell?
How about you? I mean, I know this is difficult on you. How are you doing? I mean, it's got to be a lot of emotions going on for you.
You know, people have been really helpful and supportive. So it's been really hard, but you just keep going.
What can you tell us about that night? I mean, from what we understand, you went camping and then came home. Well, tell us what happened that night.
Yeah, a lot of times I just go camping with my boys, not anything big. I just go overnight, and we do s'mores and stuff like that. And so I just went with the boys. Was planning.
So what he actually did was left overnight in the middle of a blinding snowstorm and didn't show up Monday for work, nor indeed did his wife, Susan Cox Powell, show up. The last time Susan Powell was seen was on this Sunday, December 6th. So that's what the reporter's asking about now.
Planning to do some s'mores in the morning, and
so not only was he leaving in the middle of a Sunday night, but he was going into a snowstorm supposedly to do things like make s'mores with the kids.
Yeah, we did. And then when we got home, on the way home, I found out that people were worried about us and that we were missing.
And the report is that neither you nor your wife called in sick, and they said that that's not usual. What are your thoughts on that?
Now, on that morning, before he got in touch to explain that he was just on the way back from this camping trip, extended family was sufficiently worried so as to call the police because there were concerns that the family may have succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning or something like this. And so the officers actually forced their way into the house that Monday morning, and while they found no one inside the house, they did find 2 box fans aimed at a damp spot in the living room.
No, it's not usual.
Susan had not shown up to work that day. Her purse, wallet, and ID were all still in the house. Later, police would discover her cell phone in the family's one and only vehicle, a town and country minivan, which Joshua had been driving on that overnight camping trip.
I guess why didn't you call in sick?
I didn't. I was somehow thinking that it was Sunday.
So again, in this interview, the reporter asked Josh Powell, why didn't you at least call in sick on Monday since you were late coming back from this trip?
I was somehow thinking that it was Sunday. I didn't go to church, and I just missed a day and thought, come back Sunday.
So you got confused on what day it was.
Yeah.
Now, from what we understand, there's nothing. Looks like no foul play in the home. It appears that your wife left her cell phone and purse. I mean, do you have any? I mean, does she go off to sort of maybe clear her head? I mean, do you have any idea where she could be?
No, she'll leave during the day, but she's never left overnight.
Does she have any enemies that you can think of that would?
I can't think of anyone.
Now, a lot of talk on the internet. I mean, obviously in cases like this, and you know this, they instantly talk about the husband. They think that he's the suspect, that he did something. Is there anything you want to say to address that?
I didn't do anything. I mean, I don't know where she's at. I don't even know where to start looking.
And the boys, I mean, what do you tell them about them all?
I haven't told them anything. I mean, they've overheard stuff, but I haven't. I mean, by the time it all started, I was already it was already late, and went to bed.
Well,
It's been hectic ever since.
Now, your wife laid down that night, right? She wasn't feeling well, is that? And then that's when you went camping, right? Where'd you guys go camping?
Well, she wasn't not feeling well.
Oh, okay.
She was feeling well.
Oh, okay.
But she just went to bed.
About 5-ish, is that what we heard? We heard 5. I don't know if that's true. You would know better than we would.
Well, no, she went to bed that night.
So I don't know if you can feel. Can you feel how empty Josh Powell feels? He's doing nothing essentially in this interview. That's what's so strange about it. He's doing nothing. He's not raging at the reporter for asking questions. He's not begging, pleading for Susan back, pleading for Susan in case she's watching it, or pleading for whoever has her because she's been missing for several days at this point. He's not even trying to fake anything. He's just doing almost nothing. He's collapsing inward, right? Now, people deal with stress all kinds of ways, but it's hard to fathom, of course, that this stress is the type of stress of someone who cares about the missing person. If there is stress here, it's the stress about getting caught in a lie. But again, what I see is a sort of bizarre lack of effort to express anything. There's a void that we get instead. There's no picture being painted. There's no story being weaved. There's blankness.
And what time did you go camping, would you say?
I got out to a pretty late start.
9-ish, something like that?
No, it was later.
Okay.
Basically, I'm just trying to figure out what I can do, and both try to find her and try to take care of life in general.
Okay. Where do you guys camp?
We went down south to some trails down there.
Do you mean like Moab area? Or?
No. We actually just went down to the Pony Express.
Pony Express Trail?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there campgrounds down there? Or?
Yeah,
I'm not
I guess
familiar
there's
with
a
the
few.
area, so.
But I guess
Yeah, I guess there's a few. He basically just says no. To every question the reporter asks, his answer is along the lines of, nah, it was later than that. Or, nah, it was somewhere different than that. I guess there were a few trails in this place where I said we were going camping and hiking. I guess. So you could say he's just incredibly bad at lying, right? He could be a sort of run-of-the-mill psychopath who has a missing wife under mysterious circumstances, and he's just incredibly bad at lying. He could be intellectually dim or something like this. But I would say it's not only that, it's also a weakness of will. All right, it's a lack of any kind of individual will that would normally guide even things like lies. It would guide your ability to tell truths. It would guide your ability to make any kind of intentional actions, right? There's almost a lack of intentionality here.
Yeah,
I'm not
I guess
familiar with the
there's a few.
area, so. Yeah.
But I guess I better go.
Okay.
get
Well,
some
good
things
luck
to
to you. We appreciate your time. Pony Express Trail?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there campgrounds down there? Or?
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
guess
familiar
there's
with
a
the
few.
area, so. Yeah.
But I guess I better go.
Okay.
get
Well,
some
good
things
luck
to
to you. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess there's a few, and I guess I better get back to my kids. Now, this lack of intentionality, I'm not saying that he didn't plan his actions. He could, and I think he did. But I think we're dealing with someone who did not have the ego strength to separate and individuate himself from his father in particular. He was himself engulfed to such an extent by his father that he took on this blob-like form that would then go on to subsume other people into his life, into this kind of undifferentiated lack of will, lack of integrity, ego integrity kind of lifestyle. And that because he couldn't separate, he didn't have the ego strength to separate, he also could not tolerate anyone separating from him, right? Not a spouse, not his children. And so there is a motive that pervades these crimes. The first crime being the alleged murder of Susan Cox Powell, and the second being the reason the case of Susan could never go to court, which was the murder-suicide that resulted in the deaths of Josh Powell and his 2 children. So that's where we're heading in this episode.
So in the human body, cells start out completely undifferentiated. Stem cells can be anything. These infantile cells will only, by virtue of the purpose of the tissue they find themselves in, differentiate into the cells that function appropriately in a given environment. That is the process of differentiation. So in development, stem cells are good. It's good to start off as a cell that is pluripotent, that can become anything. But once the tissue has developed, differentiation is good, right? It's good for cardiac cells to be very differentiated. It's good for red blood cells to be dedicated to their function. So, by analogy, I'm going to say that Josh Powell remained undifferentiated, that his sense of self was infantile, and so his defining characteristic was going to be petulance, like a petulant child.
Yeah. I'm feeling sick, so I think we want to leave here.
Get some medicine.
Well, yeah, I mean, that wouldn't be bad.
Okay. All right, yeah, if you want to leave, you can leave.
I didn't leave her at the Pony Express. I didn't just take her out and drop her off or even do anything.
But also potentially malignant. So follow me on one more biology analogy: tumors.
So in oncology, when a tumor is biopsied and the pathology is studied, one of the most ominous signs is the tumor's lack of differentiation. The more the cells of the tumor look like differentiated tissues cells, the less malignant it is. The more it's like something with a purpose, something with its own identity, the less it is going to destroy, right? The more undifferentiated the growth, the more malignant it tends to be. So this may be applied psychologically in this case. A self that has failed to differentiate, that remains blob-like, boundaryless, formless, may be not just immature, but in some cases dangerous. Right? So Josh Powell, with an ego that never properly formed, never separated from the undifferentiated psychic soup of the early family system, has no well-formed I with which he could feel secure in his agency. And so instead he has this sort of creeping possessive hunger to merge with others and then control them. Joshua Powell was born on January 20th, 1976 in Puyallup, Washington, to Stephen and Terica Powell. He grew up with 2 brothers, Michael and John, and 2 sisters, Jennifer and Alina. The Powell family environment was said to be highly dysfunctional, shaped by Stephen's abusive behavior. Now, Stephen Powell is someone who we will talk about as he relates to Josh Powell in this video, but I'm going to do a full video on Stephen Powell and his voyeurism and his erotomania in a separate Patreon video. So I have a Patreon, link in the description, and that's where I can talk about things that are perhaps not appropriate for YouTube or what have you. Now, Stephen Powell's wife filed for divorce in 1992, and there were multiple allegations that came out in those filings about Stephen Powell exposing his sons to pornography, refusing to enforce any kind of behavioral boundaries, to the point of pretty bizarre and perverse family dynamics, with their indication that there were no behavioral boundaries, there were no sort of lines between what is appropriate and what is not, hints at what I think was the nature of the emotional relationship as well, that Stephen Powell himself did not see his offspring as distinct from him. Rather, they were mere extensions, mere tendrils of his own undifferentiated psyche, his own intrusive, invasive, malignant psyche. By the late 1990s, Josh Powell was living in Tacoma, Washington, and attending the university there. During that time, he began dating Catherine Terry Everett, a woman he had met through his local LDS congregation. Josh and Catherine moved in together, but Joshua is said to have become increasingly controlling, and his ex-girlfriend would say he would have restrictions and limitations on what I could and couldn't do when it came to my family. At some point, she took a trip to Utah without him and chose not to return, ending the relationship over the phone. I would actually suspect in this case that Josh, now as the extension of the blob that started with Stephen, is trying to get his tendrils around Catherine Everett. It's telling that the only way she could end this relationship somehow was physically leaving and having to resort to a phone call breakup. It might be because Josh was so controlling in real life that he physically wouldn't let her, or would threaten her, because he was so intolerant of this idea of being separated from someone that he thought he had subsumed. Right, and so you'll often see this kind of behavior with relationships. In people with a very undifferentiated self, I would say that there is a going through the motions that can happen where they can at least pick up by mimicry things like going to college and especially courtship in a relationship. Because the hungry, undifferentiated self wants to subsume, is looking for more, because I don't have kind of my personal satisfaction, right? The other part of being undifferentiated is dissatisfaction, right? Looking for some purpose, looking for some fulfillment. So this ability to go through the motions, to go through mimicry, would enable a person to go through a series of courtship rituals, right? Josh Powell, though it would be difficult to believe looking at him now, was apparently capable of making these women like him, right? He was able to charm them for a period of time, and I think we just don't see that Josh Powell at all, but likely he was imitating what charming people do up until he had secured the partner. Once he has secured the partner, there is absolutely no need anymore to do anything courtship related. There is no need for him to pretend in his mind that this is a person anymore, because now this partner is just part of the same blob that he is. You know, before he has fused them into his identity, he can interact with them, pay attention to them, and actually see them in a way. Once he has secured the relationship, they are now just part of the same sort of blob, right? And so he can't even see them anymore. They've been subsumed. Now that's part of me, right? So now I'm looking for what's the next thing to subsume. What's the next thing to ooze into?
In my professionally done scientific diagram here, this is Josh Powell as the blob wearing a human mask, by the way. Once he has subsumed someone, he doesn't see them anymore because they're part of himself. Okay.
So then in November of 2000, Joshua met Susan Cox at a dinner party hosted at his apartment. They were both enrolled in an LDS church religion class, and they seemed to hit it off. Again, presumably he goes back into charm mimicry, okay? And they date for a little over a year before getting married at the Portland, Oregon temple. Joshua would go on to earn a bachelor's degree in business and hold a series of jobs over the next decade. Susan was a licensed cosmetologist and also began working at Wells Fargo after they moved to West Valley City, Utah. They would have two sons, Charles, born in January of 2005, and Braden, born in January of 2007. Now, early in their marriage, Joshua and Susan briefly lived with Josh's father, Stephen, in South Hill, Washington. During that time, Stephen Powell became obsessively infatuated with Susan. He would follow her around the house with a camcorder.
Steve Powell is doing things like sliding mirrors under the bathroom door, attempting to get images of Susan while she's undressed.
Spied on her in the bathroom using a mirror, stole her underwear, read her journals, and even posted love songs online under a fake name.
I can love you in a secret way.
Susan would never learn about the extent of the obsession, as the voyeurism charges would only come out after her death, but she did learn of his boundary-crossing feelings for her. In 2003, he would confess his romantic feelings to Susan, who would reject him and subsequently be very uncomfortable around her father-in-law.
I don't know where you're going with this.
And so soon after, the couple would move out of state, in part to put some distance between Susan and Stephen Powell. Over time, serious problems developed in Josh and Susan's marriage. Her journals and emails described growing tension, especially around Josh's refusal to attend church and his continued relationship with his father, despite Stephen Powell's past behavior.
She was extremely upset about that and disturbed, but even more disturbed when Josh just said that that's his dad.
Now, I do think this part is notable. So Josh Powell, who would go on to allegedly murder Susan, and I think the evidence is overwhelming, was not motivated by any kind of jealousy about his father. Josh Powell, like Susan, had to have been aware at least of some of his father's obsession with his wife. Did this bother him? Not particularly. It seems, as far as we can tell, he just didn't really care one way or the other. Okay? Now, how could that possibly be?
No, of course, you could say he wasn't jealous because he knew Susan wasn't interested and definitely wouldn't reciprocate, but I think it was something else. The fact that he wasn't bothered by his father's lascivious intentions gets at the notion that you cannot be jealous of yourself, right? You can only be jealous of a potential rival. If you have some loved relation and someone else is declaring their love for your partner, the jealousy comes from anger at this other trying to intrude. Josh Powell and Stephen Powell, I submit, are part of the same blob, right? Josh Powell had never separated from his father, and so he does not see his father as an other. He sees his father as part of the same ooze, the same psychic mass as himself. So according to Margaret Mailer, part of psychological development is that the infant must go through a process of separation individuation. So task one is separating from the primary caregiver. Now this is usually the mother, but the primary caregiver, whoever that may be, is for a period the means through which the infant processes the world. Right? The infant is purely undifferentiated. The infant can sort of separate and process no information on its own. It is but a series of instincts, drives, and otherwise a hard drive that is ready to have software installed on it, primed even to have software installed in a certain sort of manner, but it cannot do it on its own. It needs senses to be made sense of by the primary caregiver. After a certain period of time, the infant is forming the visual sketchpad of the world and at some point needs to place itself, needs to start using its own cursor in the operating system of the mind. And that is the individuation part, becoming your own user, right, of your operating system. So that demands this clear sense of I versus you. And if the primary caregiver does not allow the infant to ever challenge the caregiver, to ever even express independence or autonomy in even the smallest ways, then I would argue the development is arrested. That separation, individuation does not always happen for some people. Now, the biological correlate, the brain's tendency to overdevelop the synapses during childhood and into adolescence until such time as the pruning process starts in early adolescence and continues into young adulthood. So the basic strategy of the brain is to grow a huge and full bush of gray matter. Think of it almost like what we do with hands, which is we grow a web first, and then these cells in the middle of the fingers, these cells that were once a web, apoptose, and you end up with this sort of pruned hand. Our brain does the same thing. At first, everything is filled in,
And then there is a process of differentiation that prunes out the blob of brain into the information processor. So it sort of goes from this webbed brain where perhaps almost every orientation of information is possible. Like information can be processed in near infinite ways, but superficially. And then there is the synaptic pruning process, which allows for information to be processed in a way that is specific to the individual. Now, the pruning is still going to happen, even if you haven't psychologically individuated, but likely it's going to be poorly directed. It's not going to be getting feedback from a unified consciousness. So I do think it's possible to see brain abnormalities that manifest in particularly adolescence or early adulthood that reflect a sort of psychological arrest from early life. So getting back to the problems in the marriage between Josh and Susan, friends of Susan noted that by 2007, Josh had been exhibiting, quote, extremely controlling behavior. They pointed to his tendency to spend very recklessly despite being exceptionally frugal and limiting with anyone else in the family's spending. He would buy himself these high-powered computers and other tech gadgets while he reviewed all the coupons that Susan was allowed to use at the grocery store and scolded her if she bought anything, including too many snacks for the boys. He was actually allowed to have snacks while they were not. And so in 2007, Josh actually filed for bankruptcy, reporting over $200,000 in debt. By 2008, Susan was appearing fearful of her safety. It was in July of that year that she recorded a video documenting damage to their home.
Broke this and threw all my DVDs and made a mess. There's a hole in that wall.
That she said was caused by Josh. She also wrote a secret will in which she stated, "I want it to be documented that there is extreme turmoil in our marriage." And she warned, if I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one.
This is me. July 29th, 2008. It is 12:33. Mountain time. Covering all my bases, making sure that if something happens to me or my family or all of us, that our assets are documented. Hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after as much as that's possible.
So this is really heartbreaking to watch because I do sense a definite vigilance here. I mean, for one, it's the fact that what she's doing is documenting her life and possessions in case something happens to me or my family, which is very haunting, knowing what happens. But for two, the tone of her voice and her expression, you can see she very much intentionally, she does have intentionality. She tries to smile to sort of almost to comfort the viewer. She tries to smile.
Hope everything works out and we're all happy and live happily ever after as much as that's possible. Charlie, say hi.
But she is not optimistic about that. She is clearly not optimistic that things will work out.
Hi. Today is Tuesday, July 29th, 2008, and we are in the 6254 West Sarah Circle house. This is me. Hi. Sorry. And it is, can you see that? 11:44 a.m.
And the other thing to note is that this was on the advice of an attorney. And so what it signals, in addition to fear, is intentionality, the intent to potentially divorce Josh Powell. And that gets at motive. Not because Josh Powell so desperately wanted to keep Susan per se, but because Josh Powell needed to control whatever people he had subsumed into himself. Because remember, to a child that has never gone through the appropriate separation, what that represents now as an adult is a terrifying unknown. It would represent an entire collapse of what has been serving as the substitute for I, right? The ego has not developed. In its place, there is this blob, this primordial ooze that knows only seeking, consuming, and controlling, right? Anything other than that is essentially death to Josh Powell. If he is not this thing that controls, that consumes and controls, then he is nothing, right? The void would be revealed if she left.
So it's expansion port 3. I don't know what kind it is. There's part of the phone. Books. My parents lent us the beautiful diamond necklace my mom bought. Jade, that's a family heirloom. Not worth thousands of dollars, but I have assets. Speakers, 5.1 surround sound. 3,000 pounds of wheat, and these are buckets of wheat. See?
So 3,000. So the other thing the video does is it documents essentially all of their possessions of monetary value. It does focus in particular on Josh's sort of high-tech purchases. It's the evidence of that.
Our unfinished basement. We bought 3,000 pounds of wheat, and these are buckets of wheat.
3,000 pounds of wheat. My understanding is that that is sort of the one part of the LDS tradition that the Powell family approved of. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's an LDS teaching to keep a certain amount of wheat sort of stockpiled just in case. And it's interesting that Stephen Powell, had declared himself in opposition to the LDS Church, likely because he couldn't control it, right? Stephen Powell wanted to consume church members and control them. He couldn't handle this alternate other, this authority figure elsewhere in the church. He could be the only one, so he couldn't tolerate being part of organized religion. But he and Josh, I believe, are both still practicing, or were still practicing, this stockpiling wheat or grains. And it's kind of funny in this discussion of like the blob that, as my theory is that all that these undifferentiated egos know is consumption, expansion, and control. That consumption of wheat, procuring consumables is sort of what they resonate with, right? They resonate with the part where it's about procuring and stockpiling, controlling nutrients. It's something a blob would do, okay, is hoard a bunch of wheat. Now, do you guys know what I'm talking about when I talk about the Blob? The Blob was a sci-fi movie. I guess I first, because it's my channel, I should first talk about the Greek myth that is relevant or pertinent to this case. Then we can talk about the Blob. So Kronos in Greek mythology may be seen as the archetype of the devouring father, right? So Kronos, also called Saturn by the Romans, was a Titan, the pre-Olympian race of gods, who castrated his father Uranus to take his power, right? So Kronos castrates his own father, very Freudian, I might add, but then becomes extremely paranoid that his own children are going to do the same to him. So to prevent this, Kronos devours each of his children at birth, swallowing them into his body. Only one of them escapes, and that goes on to be Zeus, right? Zeus, who later returns and forces Kronos to vomit up his siblings and does in fact overthrow him. So this is a sort of, this is like the Oedipus story on the level of the gods in some ways. So I think, this almost mirrors this idea of there was this race of gods that were sort of pre-understanding, Zeus being the one who escapes and then goes on to sort of introduce the modern era of gods to the Greeks, right? Separates from the primordial Titans. Zeus is very much a god of will, capital W, will. But Kronos on his own can sort of also be seen as this archetype of the father that prevents the son from developing a distinct ego, as opposed to the guiding father that understands the son will inevitably separate. Certainly Stephen Powell, I think, is behaving like a king in a private cosmos where his fantasies, his delusions, and his needs define a reality that he does not even let his children escape from, right, from an early life, that he sees them as extensions of his psychic domain, that his mind is not confined to his own body. It, in fact, encompasses his lineage, just like Kronos literally encompasses by devouring his children. And so perhaps there was a kind of psychological infanticide that had happened to Josh Powell well before the tragedy that would befall his nuclear family. But what this has created, this sort of lack of separation between Stephen Powell and Josh Powell, and how does the person that is Josh Powell interact with the world, well, that's where I'm getting the Blob, right?
Doc Hallen's been killed.
Doc Hallen? What happened?
It's over at his place. You gotta come now.
Oh, wait a minute, Steve. Tell us what happened.
Well, I'm trying to tell you. Now, this thing had killed the doc.
Well, what was it?
Stop with it, kid. But it's kind of like a mass that keeps getting bigger and bigger.
Very soon, the most horrifying monster menace ever conceived will be oozing into this theater. Two teenagers see it first, like a falling star from outer space.
Boy, that was close. Come on, let's see if I can find it.
An old man finds it, touches it, and this is the shocking result. From then on, there's no stopping the Blob as it spreads from town to town.
Now, the Blob is kitschy sci-fi horror, and I really don't mean to make light in any way. I think that the conceit is actually a terrifying one, and that we are forced to use symbols like the Blob to approximate what are in fact sort of recurrent human phenomenon that defy easy explanation. They demand symbols, they demand archetypes, right? That's why Carl Jung and also myself are always sort of trying to reference what have been like the prior descriptions of these patterns that we're seeing in our psychological studies, let's say. But I do want to say for the Powell family, it does seem like not everyone was subsumed into Stephen Powell. Josh Powell seems like he was the most sort of integrated into the Blob, fully devoured by Kronos, if you will. But I think other in the family, the sisters were able to escape. And so I do want to say that escape is possible, but regrettably not all. Neither Josh nor his brother were able to escape the cycle of suffering. So returning to the disappearance of Susan Powell, it was the morning of December 6, 2009. Susan Powell attended church with her two sons, Charles and Braden. Then that afternoon, a neighbor visited the family's home and left around 5 p.m. The neighbor was saying that Susan was talking about being tired despite it being early and was going upstairs to lay down. Josh Powell had magnanimously offered to do the cooking. I believe he had cooked pancakes. He was doing this breakfast for dinner thing, but Susan getting ill after eating his cooking was noted to be one of the many suspicious things about this. Again, that next day, December 7th, 2009, neither Susan nor the children showed up as expected. When the boys were not dropped off at daycare, Joshua's mother, Terica, and his estranged sister, Jennifer Graves, went to the house to check on them. Unable to reach Joshua or Susan, they contacted the police. Concerned that the family may have succumbed to carbon monoxide poisoning or other hazards, officers forced entry into the home. No one was inside, but they did find 2 box fans aimed at a damp spot on the living room couch. Again, Susan had not shown up for work that next day. Her purse, wallet, and ID were all still in the house. Her cell phone was later found to be in the family's vehicle, that Chrysler minivan which Josh had been driving to the supposed camp trip. So around 5 p.m. that evening, Joshua returned home with his 2 sons and was brought in for questioning. He told police that he had left Susan asleep at home. Shortly after midnight, he had taken the boys for a spontaneous camping trip to the Pony Express Trail in western Utah. They were immediately suspicious. The idea of taking 2 young children camping in the middle of a snowstorm after midnight on a weeknight when they were due at daycare on that Monday morning raised significant doubts. Joshua had also failed to notify his employer of his absence, claiming he thought it was Sunday, not Monday.
On them, but see, I think that's new. They just get bigger. Those are new.
Okay.
That's new.
Okay.
Like I say, there's 3 new ones. They just keep getting bigger and bigger.
Okay. All right, no problem. Have a seat. Let me go grab my notebook and I'll be right back, okay?
Okay.
Supposedly petulant about his dry skin here. He can't believe it. Look at what he has to deal with now. Not only is he dealing with these interview questions, he's having to deal with dry skin. Oh, by the way, he's been called in to talk about his wife's murder or disappearance.
Was Jennifer living with your mom at the time, or was she living away from your mom, or do they live together?
No, they lived together, but they didn't at the time.
Oh, okay. All right. So
She only moved here, my mom,
Mm-hmm.
maybe last year.
Oh, okay. All right. So. Relationship, and you guys started addressing it 6 months ago, or is this something that has just developed over the last 6 months? Because you gave me a 6 months to a year time frame.
Well,
So I'm trying to.
it seems to me that we started seeing a counselor, I don't know when, but it's been quite a few months.
Okay, so 6 months to a year ago you started seeing a counselor?
That's not been a year with the counselor.
Okay.
I honestly don't remember how long.
Okay. So this has been a relationship issue throughout your guys' relationship, and you're starting to address it. You've just been addressing it recently with a counselor. Is that correct?
Need some water or anything? Want some water?
I'm okay, thanks.
You're good? Okay. Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?
Just 1 second.
Again, what's different is the lack of differentiation. There's emptiness. There's blobbiness. There's no corners to anything.
I understand you're a little frustrated that you've been sitting here talking to us for a while, but...
It's not frustrating, it's just... It's a little bit hard, but...
What I want you to understand is we're doing everything... We're going to do everything possible to help you out, try to find your wife, and we need to do this. It's not fun for us, it's not fun for you. But we do have to do this. And I know sometimes you just feel like...
I know.
You've been sitting here talking to us for a little bit, but you're the only one that's going to be able to help us.
Well, I was really concerned when they're sitting there making light of like this, and I'm going... That's starting to get a little bit scary, and also the fact I made a big deal about the cell phone, which I didn't even, I'd forgotten that I had it at all.
Wow.
Forgot about it.
So again, what's notable is the lack of almost anything in terms of expressivity, the lack of anything other than a kind of bland emptiness. The one emotion we do see is a kind of petulance, like whining about some things getting bigger on his fingers, which I guess is partially trying to, he may be trying to say this is something other than defensive wounds.
See, I think that's new. That's new. They just get bigger. Those are new.
Okay.
But his emotional stance is like, can you believe that I'm having to deal with this? It's this kind of petulance. It's this childish emotion.
Really concerned when they're sitting there making light of like this, and I'm going, that's starting to get a little bit scary, you know, and also the fact I made a big deal about the cell phone, which I didn't even, I'd forgotten that I had it at all.
Right. It's not even rage or anger, something that would come from a place of force and conviction, because these things would demand a will. All that there is this sort of primordial childhood whininess.
That's new.
Okay.
Like I say, there's 3 new ones. They just keep getting bigger and bigger.
Okay. All right, no problem. Have a seat. Let me go grab my notebook and I'll be right back, okay?
Okay.
So he's sulky about having to answer these
You want a
questions.
glass of water or anything? Okay.
It's an infantile defense. But it's not what someone who was worried about their missing wife would do. You know, he's actually here because his wife is missing. And now I think he's trying to fake cry. I think this is mimicry. I think he's trying to work himself into seeming like he's been crying, you know, when he's got some time here. But when he's actually expressing emotions.
But it's been quite a few months.
Okay, so 6 months to a year ago you started seeing a counselor?
That's not been a year with the counselor.
Okay.
And like I say, he just has to talk to me about a couple little things more, and we'll be done here. I would imagine. I don't know. I have to talk to him and find out what he's doing.
Yeah, I'm actually starting to feel pretty sick, so I'm...
You want to go to the bathroom?
No.
Use the restroom or anything? Okay. Let me go and tell him how you're feeling, okay? I'll be right back.
Okay.
Sort of like the child tyrant too, like the idea that if you don't give in to his every whim, his every childish need, his desire to not have any boundaries enforced or to have any consequences, if you don't sort of subjugate to that, he's going to pout. He's going to make you miserable by whining. It's this sort of child tyrant, you know, this entitlement, which is natural in very early life. It's the only thing that the child has is crying for attention. But what we have here is the fake performative cry to try to sort of do his part to mimic what someone in his situation should be doing. And then we have the actual expressed emotion, which is like, why are you like bothering me with this?
I mean, like I said, we haven't really gotten anywhere with locations to check and stuff. What have you thought of?
I just can't think of anywhere she would go in the morning.
Other than to work?
Yeah, I mean...
Okay. Who should I be looking at? Do you think somebody, I mean, is there somebody I need to look at that maybe, I mean, what do you,
I don't think she has enemies.
Yeah.
You know?
How about this question? Most definitely. What?
So somewhere in there, the part where he's saying, and they're bothering me about the hands and blah, blah, blah. After a second police interview on December 8th, Joshua rented a car from Salt Lake City International Airport. He disappeared for nearly 24 hours. Then the next day, December 9th, around 4 p.m., he called his mother from a new phone while driving south on Interstate 84. He later told his sister Jennifer that he'd spent the day aimlessly driving around the city, getting on and off various freeways. And when the car was returned, police discovered he had driven an extra 807 miles. Miles that have never been fully accounted for. On December 9th, investigators obtained a warrant and searched the Powell home. They found traces of Susan's blood on the floor, $1.5 million in life insurance policies taken out on her, and a handwritten note from Susan expressing fear for her safety. Years later, in August 2012, police released additional records that painted an even more disturbing picture. In the days following Susan's disappearance, Joshua emptied her retirement accounts, canceled her regular chiropractic appointments, and withdrew the boys from daycare. Colleagues also recalled that Joshua had previously talked about how to dispose of a body in an abandoned mine shaft in the Utah desert. Stuff like, at a party, hey, I know how I could dispose of a body. You'd put it in one of those mine shafts. The Powell's elder son Charlie was interviewed by police, but his version of events differed from his father's. Charlie said Susan had gone with them, but didn't come back.
Well, what did you do last night?
Go camping.
You went camping? Who were you camping with?
My dad and my mom and my little brother.
He said that they had gotten out of the car to look for crystals, but that Mommy stayed where the crystals are.
My mom stayed where a crystals are.
Weeks after that disappearance, a teacher had also reported that Charlie said, "My mommy is dead," in school. And months later, Susan's parents revealed that Braden had drawn a picture at daycare showing 3 people in a van and telling staff Mommy was in the trunk. Police planned to question Joshua again and subpoenaed both aired and unaired footage of his interviews with local TV stations.
Are we rolling? Why talk now?
Oh, man. I wanted to come out and say something. I'm not going to talk about anything that my attorney has specifically told me not to.
Less than a month after the disappearance, he was officially named a person of interest. And then a few weeks later, it became clear that Josh was only returning to the Utah home to move the family's belongings because he was relocating to Puyallup, Washington for good. In other words, in the midst of an active police investigation into his missing wife, he moved to a different state to live with his father. Not long after this move, a website called SusanPowell.org went live. Claiming to be the official website of Susan Powell, it featured anonymous blog entries defending Josh and accusing Susan's family and his sister Jennifer and the LDS Church of running a smear campaign. Some posts pushed a bizarre theory that Susan had vanished alongside Stephen Coker, a man who had incidentally gone missing from Nevada around the same time, and that the two had possibly run off to Brazil. It was widely believed that Joshua and Stephen were the authors of this site's content, and that their theories were baseless at best. By late 2010, the pair had been publicly claiming that Susan had abandoned her family due to mental illness and left with another man.
I believe that Susan had a liaison with somebody who disappeared the same week she did. She was very open sexually, and when I read her journals, it's clear that most of the relationships she got into with males were ones that she initiated.
Susan's family, the Coxes, would dismiss these claims as completely unsubstantiated. Now, investigators then began looking more closely at Stephen Powell after a family friend came forward describing his obsessive behavior toward Susan.
And run away with another man.
With another man. Susan was very, very sexual with me. She was very flirtatious. I mean, she did it. I did. I mean, we interacted in a lot of sexual ways because Susan enjoys doing that.
But
I enjoy doing that.
Susan had often referred to her father-in-law as creepy, but she, I don't think, had any idea how creepy the man truly was.
No, I'll do this.
And during this period of time, Steve Powell is constantly filming Susan. This is a man who is collecting video for his own perverse gratification. Because Steve Powell is a voyeur.
So a search of his home uncovered over 4,000 voyeuristic images, including many of Susan, taken without her knowledge, some focused on specific body parts. Really a trove of incriminating evidence, although not for the crime of murder. Josh's brother, Michael Powell, also drew police attention after they discovered he had sold his broken-down Ford Taurus to a junkyard in Pendleton, Oregon, shortly after Susan went missing. He then later searched and obtained satellite images of that lot. Authorities went and found the car, and a cadaver dog signaled that human remains had been in the trunk, but DNA testing was inconclusive. So the suspicion here was Michael aiding his brother Josh in the disposal of Susan's body. Tensions between the Powell and Cox family were escalating to a boiling point. After a police raid on the Powell home in 2011, both Josh and Stephen were giving interviews claiming that Susan had written journals indicating a romantic connection between her and Stephen Powell. And Stephen went so far as to start saying publicly that he and Susan had been falling in love before her disappearance. Not long after Stephen Powell was arrested on those voyeurism and child pornography charges based on some of the other images that were found, which were, again, secretly recorded videos of neighbors, including young girls. The Assistant Attorney General would also say that Josh was a subject in this investigation, but was not arrested on these charges, as Stephen was the one clearly linked to the accrual and storage of all of this media. So the day after Stephen Powell was arrested, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, filed for custody of Charles and Braden. The court did grant temporary custody and ordered Josh move out of his father's home if he wanted a chance at regaining parental rights. Toward the end of 2011, Joshua underwent a series of court-ordered evaluations, while the psychologist, James Manley, noted that Josh had no criminal record, held a steady job history, and showed basic parenting competence. He also described Josh as defensive, narcissistic, and unwilling to admit personal flaws. Manley was especially concerned about Josh's controlling behavior with his sons and his increasing paranoia, which he believed stemmed from the investigation and media attention. Despite these concerns, Manley recommended that Josh continue to have supervised visits with his children several times per week. My understanding is that the psychologist did in fact suspect that Josh Powell had a role in Susan's disappearance, most likely murder being the role, but that the psychologist did not feel it was part of his role, that was not what he was called there to do. And of course, it was the legal system that was responsible for figuring out whether Josh Powell should be in prison. I don't want to criticize when hindsight is so biasing in this case. You know, the idea that we can look back and say Josh's paranoia may not have been just about the investigation, but the paranoia of someone who cannot tolerate his children leaving him, right? And that if I can't have you, no one can have you was the logic by which he ostensibly would have killed his wife. And now if there's this threat to him losing the children, losing custody, if I can't have you, no one can have you, might again be the impulse, right? But again, that's hindsight. What we unfortunately know is that these supervised visits with his children were themselves under threat because of the legal system, right? Not because of the psychological evaluation. But while they continued, Josh seems to have come up with yet another horrible and destructive plan. I suppose if we could use our metaphor, we could consider the way that cells sometimes undergo a programmed cell death. When there are signals from the environment that a mass of cells will be starved, sometimes apoptosis happens, intentional programmed self-destruction by a cell. But I don't know exactly why I'm even grasping for a metaphor right now. What happened, of course, was on February 5th, 2012, when the social worker responsible for these supervised visits brought Charlie and Braden Powell to their scheduled visit with their father at his now rented home in South Hill. Josh pulled the boys ahead, pulled them inside, slammed the door before the social worker could enter, and locked her outside. She then immediately called 911, trying to explain that she was supervising this visit and the parent had locked her out of the house. Now, this 911 call I believe is still available to listen to. I've listened to this actually quite a while ago when I was first learning about this case. And it's very frustrating to listen to and
Reporting. Hey, I'm on a supervised visitation for a court-ordered visit, and something really weird has happened. The kids went into the house, and the parent, the biological parent, whose name is Josh Powell, will not let me in the door. What should I do?
What's the address?
It's 8119, and I think it's 89th. I don't know what the address is.
Okay, that's pretty important for me to know.
I'm sorry, I can't. Just a minute. Let me get in my car and see if I can find it. Nothing like this has ever happened before at these visitations, so I'm really shocked. And I could hear one of the kids crying, but he still wouldn't let me in. Okay, it is just a minute. I have it here. You can't find me by GPS?
No.
Okay, it is, I still can't find it. But I think I need help right away. He's on a very short lease with CSHS, and CPS has been involved. And this is the craziest thing. He looked right at me and closed the door. Are you there?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just waiting to know where you are.
Okay. It's 8119 189th Street, Court East, Puyallup, 98375. And I'd like to pull out of the driveway because I smell gasoline and he won't let me in.
You want to pull out of the driveway because you smell gasoline, but he won't let you...
He won't let me in.
He won't let you out of the driveway?
He won't let me in the house.
Whose house is
The
it?
kids in the house and he won't let me in. It's a supervised visit.
I understand. Whose house is it?
Josh Powell.
Okay, so you don't live there, right?
No, I don't. No, I'm contracted to the state to provide supervised visitation.
I see. Okay. And who is there to exercise their visitation?
I am. And the visit is with Josh Powell.
And who
And
supervises?
he is the husband that I supervise.
So you supervise and you're doing the visit?
Yeah,
You're
I
supervising yourself?
I supervise myself. I'm the supervisor here.
Wait a minute. If it's a supervised visit, you can't supervise yourself. If you're the
I
visitor...
do supervise myself. I'm the supervisor for the supervised visit.
Okay, well, aren't you the one making the visit? Or is there another
I'm
parent
the one.
that you're supervising?
No, I'm the one that supervises. I pick up the kids at their grandparents.
Yes. And then who visits with the children?
Josh Powell.
Okay, so you're supposed to be there to supervise Josh Powell's visit with the children.
Yes, that's correct.
And how did...
And he's the husband of missing Susan Powell. This is a high-profile case.
How did he gain access to the children before you got there?
I was one step in back of them.
Okay, so they went into the house and then he locked you out.
Yes, he shut the door right in my face.
All right, now it's clear. Your last name?
I think I'll just say I think there were some communication difficulties between the social worker and the 911 dispatcher.
Okay, how long will it be?
I don't know, ma'am. They have to respond to emergency, life-threatening situations first. The first available deputy...
Well, this could be life-threatening. He went to court on Wednesday, and he didn't get his kids back. And this is really... I'm afraid for their lives.
Okay, has he threatened the lives of the children previously?
I have no idea.
All right. We'll have the first available deputy contact you.
It certainly sounded like the 911 dispatcher wasn't really understanding the gravity of the situation, but I don't want to get into any kind of
blame game here, other than blaming Josh Powell himself and also the fact that he was allowed to have supervised visits at all.
I think it's very likely that Josh Powell had premeditated this to an extent that it may have been impossible that this could have been stopped in time, right? I think even if the social worker had made it into the house, likely the social worker would have died. So I say this partially because I can only imagine what it's like to have been the social worker or the 911 dispatcher when this became public. And of course, we know what happened, which was both children were killed and the house was set ablaze. The house, in fact, exploded. We hear a second 911 call from the social worker screaming that the house is on fire. The blast also killed Josh Powell, and authorities would very quickly rule this incident a double murder-suicide, stating that the explosion was clearly intentional. When Stephen Powell, who was now in jail for those voyeurism and pornography charges, was informed of the deaths, officials noted that he didn't seem very upset by the news, but was angry towards authorities who notified him. 2 weeks later, Stephen invoked his Fifth Amendment right when questioned about Susan's disappearance. Her family, the Coxes, has long maintained that Stephen knew what happened to her. In May of 2012, Stephen was convicted on those voyeurism charges for which he had been awaiting trial, but that trial largely avoided discussion of Susan Powell's case. Following a brief investigation, authorities would further confirm that that explosion killing Josh and his sons had been carefully planned. The official cause for all three was death by carbon monoxide poisoning. However, the coroner also found that the children had been struck in the head and neck before succumbing to the fumes. Inside the home, investigators discovered 2 5-gallon gas cans and signs that the gasoline had been spread throughout the house to fuel the fire. Just before the explosion, Josh had sent emails to several friends and family members saying goodbye. Some messages included instructions on where to find his money and how to shut off his utilities. Records show that he had drawn $7,000 the day before and had donated his son's toys and books to local charities. He named his brother Michael as the primary beneficiary of his life insurance policy. Again, this was not a spontaneous decision by an ego that was collapsing. This was the premeditated apoptosis of what had become a malignant psychic tumor. Nearly a year later, on February 11th, 2013, Josh's brother Michael would die by jumping from the top of a parking garage. Police had questioned Michael several times in 2012, particularly about that abandoned car he had left at a junkyard shortly after Susan vanished, and authorities would later describe him as evasive. Investigators now believe that both Josh and Michael were involved in Susan's disappearance. The official investigation into that disappearance was closed by West Valley City on May 21st, 2013. Jennifer Graves, Josh's estranged sister, released a memoir in June 2013 called A Light in Dark Places. This was co-written with Emily Clausen, and the book detailed the troubled history of the Powell family. Jennifer explained that she wrote it, quote, to help other people to recognize abuse in either their own relationships or relationships around them, because it's not always completely apparent. And I think that gets at, it's not apparent when you're in it. If you are part of the consuming blob, if you have never been allowed to get out from under it, if you've never been allowed to individuate, then you are seeing it from that same vantage point until somehow, by some miracle almost, you can individuate against the odds, as seems to have happened here with Jennifer Graves. And so I definitely think that's it's a light in a dark place, right, as she says, to be able to escape the cycle of suffering like that. Then in 2015, Susan's father, Chuck Cox, won a legal battle over her estate, defeating a claim by the Powells, who had tried to declare Susan legally dead in order to collect life insurance. That same year, the Cox family filed a lawsuit against Washington's Department of Social and Health Services, arguing that the agency had prioritized Josh's parental rights over the safety of the children, which ultimately enabled their deaths. Initially, a federal court sided with the state, ruling that this department was not negligent and that the social workers had immunity. But in 2019, an appeals court reversed part of that decision. It upheld the social workers' immunity, but allowed the negligence claim against the department to proceed to trial. And in a landmark decision, a jury did find Social and Health Services negligent and rewarded $98 million to the estates of Charles and Braden Powell. So again, my take was not blaming the social worker and the 911 dispatcher, because by that time it was too late. I think the issue is Josh Powell was not only living freely in the community, but also getting parental visitation rights, it seems like someone really, really messed that up, right? I think there's a sort of tragedy of the commons there, like with the case of the psychologist who would say that he suspected Josh's involvement in Susan's disappearance, but did not include those suspicions in the official report because Josh had not been charged and the concerns were outside of the scope of his role. You know, I'm afraid that like that is true, but that there are all these people involved, none of whom sort of felt like they had the scope to just say, we can't be doing this, right? Like there was no individual with a will in this sort of bureaucracy between the legal department and social and health services, not one person that could just step up and say, this guy is, there's overwhelming suspicions here. You know, so there's almost like this mirror of the Blob manifesting perhaps in these types of organizations, this sort of lack of will, this lack of drive. You know, one individual who could say, we have to intervene. So it's somebody's job to intervene and say, Josh Powell can't be having these supervised visits, right? And look, I know the flip side is if you arrest him prematurely and you don't have evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, then you end up never being able to hold him accountable, right? But it just seems ironic in this case that there was a time when Stephen Powell was in jail for voyeurism charges while Josh Powell had been out for a year despite being the primary person of interest in a murder. And not only that, Stephen Powell, who had been arrested but not even charged yet, could be cited as the reason that Josh couldn't have full custody. So that's all to say, I think I have to support Susan's family, the Coxes, in their lobbying efforts because they I know have had this goal to restrict or eliminate visitation rights for parents under active investigation for murder. I think that shows that they're the ones who are maintaining some will here. They're the ones saying, if this is what we have to do to navigate the bureaucracy, if we have to get a law on the books that says, hey, you can't have visitation rights if you're under active investigation for murder, all right, we'll do it that way. You know, that's what the Coxes are doing, and I support it. Now, like I said, a full video on Stephen Powell talking about his particular pathologies will be on the Patreon. In the meantime, I really appreciate those of you that stuck with me on this tumultuous intellectual journey. I hope this was helpful, again, in identifying this kind of other extreme, the other extreme from the overdeveloped, over-differentiated ego, you know, the ego that is obsessed with self-perception, right? Josh Powell is certainly not Luca Magnotta, right? He's not someone who has developed this grandiose ego and is seeing everything through the lens of this crystallized sense of self, a false self, but an ego nonetheless. He is someone navigating the world from an underdeveloped position, a sense of self that is globular and poorly defined, very poorly defined. I think that's going to do it for today. Thank you again for watching this. Thanks so much to all my supporters on Patreon, and I will see you guys some other time.